I'd like to thank you for tuning in today to our program. If you've tuned into our program today, it shows that you have a desire for spiritual things, and that encourages me to continue in preaching the gospel and to bring lessons like this to this medium. My lesson today is dealing with the effects of premarital sex. I believe this is an important subject today. Young people and older folks too are bombarded with the world's standards of morality and immorality. The values and moral standards which were endorsed by most Americans in years past are now ridiculed or ignored by many. Teaching on sexual purity before and after marriage is no longer held before young people as the law of God, nor even an ideal goal to strive for. So-called sexual freedom is flaunted as the norm among teenagers and adults, and often those are ridiculed who expect or encourage young people to remain virgins until marriage. God's law is plain. Flee sexual immorality. Every sin that a man does is outside the body, but he who commits sexual immorality sins against his own body. That's 1 Corinthians 6:18. God, our Creator, knows our needs and what is best for us, His creation. He is not a cosmic killjoy. Behind each negative Bible command are two positive principles. One is to protect us, and the other is to provide for us. God has good plan for us, and does not want us to do something that will bring pain to us or to others. To illustrate this, consider an owner's manual that comes with an automobile. I may want to change the oil once a year. That takes less time and would seem to cost less. But the owner's manual says to change the oil every 5,000 miles. Now, if I have good sense, I understand that the manufacturer knows better how to care for it than I do. Following their advice will save me much grief and expense. And we'll have also an owner's manual that we come with, called the Bible. It may seem good to us to enjoy the pleasures of sex before marriage, but the owner's manual disagrees. So whose judgment should we consider? Ours or God's? God's motivation in dealing with us is love. God is love. So says 1 John 4:16. He is the author of love, and He knows all about it. God is not anti-sex. He created sex and said it was good, but He gave us rules with it. Rules in any realms are to protect us and to give us freedom to enjoy the activity we are engaging in, whether it be sports or whatever. Can you imagine a ball game without rules, where everyone does just what they want to do? We have one basic rule from God with reference to sexual activity. That is, wait until marriage. Look at God's design and plan for our happiness. What we have, faith in powerful and all-wise God. We obey without always understanding the reason behind the command. But in this area of sexual conduct, God has provided evidence that His way is best in words and principles taught throughout the Bible. Consider 4 areas of life that we will greatly be affected by our choices of sexual behavior. Look first at the effects of unchastity, so that we can know how to deal with these consequences. They are physical, spiritual, emotional, and relational effects of an immoral lifestyle. Physical effects. We saw in 1 Corinthians 6:18 that sex before marriage is a sin against the body. Sinning against the body means losing respect for your body, as well as body of the one you are involved with. Once respect is lost, it becomes easier to indulge in promiscuity sex. Losing respect then leads to a warped view of love and centers the definition of love around physical. The emotional needs which God created are not met in casual sex, but in the loving commitment of a mate. Only in marriage is it possible for sexual relationships to reaffirm the dignity and uniqueness of each sexual partner. Sex combined with love in marriage makes us want to give to our mate, not take. Waiting as God commands gives peace of mind, which affects our physical health. We don't experience the stress of worrying about unwanted pregnancies or sexually transmitted diseases, STDs, that could kill or cripple us or our children. Now, of course, the safe sex campaign across our country fools many into a false sense of mind. Birth control methods are sometimes unreliable, and a high rate of failure for condoms is not understood among many teens. At best, among those who are sexually active, 1 in 6 condoms will fail, and at worst 1 in 3. That's the same or worse odds in Russian roulette, which is a pretty stupid game, I might add. And of course, the pill offers no protection whatsoever against STDs. 50 years ago, teens were warned about 2 STDs. They were called venereal diseases then: syphilis and gonorrhea. What has our newfound sexual freedom brought? There are now over 50 STDs, and AIDS is not the only one that kills. And others can cripple and or make life miserable. Some cause birth defects. They pass a parent's foolish decision on to an innocent child. Furthermore, that sperm that causes pregnancy can get through a tiny tear or pinhole in a condom. But the virus that causes AIDS is up to 300 to 400 times smaller than that sperm. So what does that same tear or hole look like to the AIDS virus? It looks like a train tunnel. Dr. C. Everett Koop, former U.S. Surgeon General, doubts that there will ever be an AIDS cure. It's a virus, and we've never cured any virus, not even the common cold. And do you know about cervical cancer? A disease that is proven to be more prevalent among sexually active teenage girls. Spiritual effects. God blesses purity. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Matthew 5:8. Watch your heart with all diligence, for from it springs the issues of life. Proverbs 4:23. We are to be wise in what is good and innocent in what is evil. Romans 16:19. Abstain from all sexual immorality. God has called us for purity. 1 Thessalonians 4:3 and 5 and 7. Clearly, God's word forbids any type of sex outside of marriage. There are spiritual consequences any time we disobey God. God will judge fornicators and adulterers. Hebrews 13:4. Sexual sins brought destruction to Sodom and Gomorrah in Genesis 19. Many Bible characters committed sexual sins and were judged by God. Great trouble and grief came to Lot and his daughters, to Shechem, Reuben, Judah, Tamar, Samson, and David. Judgment from God may be immediate, as in the death of David's son, or come in the future consequences that we may face. Medical science may eliminate or lessen some consequences of my sin, but it cannot remove my accountability before God. Sin separates us from God. Isaiah 59:1-2 and Hosea 5-6. It causes us to be a bad influence on others, both Christians and non-Christians. Sexual purity is a way to show respect for others and to confirm their dignity as human beings. It is important to show someone the love of God while engaging in immorality with that person. When we maintain sexual purity, we can be channels of God's love and can accurately represent Him to others. Patience is the fruit of the Spirit, and against such there is no law. Galatians 5:23. Waiting for someone or something builds excitement, as in waiting for a birthday. Sex is something we wait our whole lives for until we finally partake of it. A godly character results from patience and perseverance. When we wait for sex till the proper time and place, our character is developed and self-esteem is built. We develop self-control, which is required to live a godly life. Waiting to build trust, and God's plan is for marriage to be built on a basic trust factor. Sexual involvement almost always wipes out trust in a relationship. In surveys conducted, it is found that sexual intimacy produces more broken relationships than strengthens them. Emotional effects. God's plan gives protection from being put on a performance basis. When put on a performance basis with another person, one is accepted only when he or she acts or does something the way the other person wants. They are respected not for who they are, but for what they do. Their value and dignity is lost. A boy says, "I love you if you will have sex with me," or "because you're pretty," rather than "I love you." That is conditional love and is worthless for building a committed relationship. Without the committed bonds of marriage, sex is an inherently selfish act done for personal satisfaction or gain. We must continue to please for the relationship to continue, and that leaves one in a constant state of insecurity. God protects us from being put on a performance basis by reserving sex for the commitment of marriage. Are you aware of the various studies that show that sexual satisfaction is much greater in marriage than in an uncommitted relationship? Why is that? Could it be that God knew what He was doing when He created us and ordained the marriage relationship as the place for fulfillment? The emotional baggage that often comes with premarital sex includes sexual dysfunction in marriage. Many end up in counseling or therapy to deal with the problems related to teenage sex. Studies have shown that premarital sex also increases the rate of cheating after marriage. Teens don't know that when they are young, but God knew it when He gave us the rules in the owner's manual. Guilt is another consequence of violating God's standard of chastity until marriage. This has long-term effects on future relationships in marriage and may be haunting us and affecting a person longer than any other consequence. To have the sex act linked with guilt in one's emotional because of premarital activity causes the joy intended by God for husband and wife to be robbed and clouded. For example, a couple I know had been married for over 50 years, and sex had never been any meaning for her. Premarital sex did its damage. Guilt is an awareness of having transgressed a standard of right and wrong, or it may be just a lingering doubt of thinking that some act was wrong. Our society is plagued by those two kinds of guilt. The first is a moral guilt, which Christians are subject to, which tells us specifically when we have stepped outside of God's boundaries of conduct. It is a conscious awareness of a specific transgression. The other kind of guilt might be called a floating sense of guilt. The psychologist says it is indeed amazing that in guilt might be called a floating sense of guilt. A psychologist, he talks about a fundamental, irreversible culture that we have. This sense of guilt should be so widespread and deep-rooted that we don't know what is the right or the wrong thing to do in this society. The Bible defines what we should do. And God has set marriage as to be in its proper place for sex. We are protected within this boundary. Husbands and wives don't have to be concerned with catching a disease. They are unselfish and open in expressing their sexual needs to one another. They can plan for a family they want, and when children come, they're counted for blessings from God, not reminders of a grave mistake. Again, God protects us from shame and guilt and gives us joy in the sexual union of marriage. Misleading feelings is another emotional effect of fornication. This often comes from confusion between sex and love. Sex outside of marriage turns the relationship upside down and mixes emotions to the point of misinterpreting feelings. When we mix sex and love, we confuse the concept of giving and taking. Personal, selfish reasons cause premarital sex to take, but sometimes the taking may be confused as giving. A girl gives in to having the security the boy provides, or maybe the popularity in being his girlfriend. Many times young people are misled by these emotions, and they think that they really are in love. The sex is so powerful that it creates strong emotional bonds, often when there is little in common and little basis for a long-lasting relationship. Those mixed up feelings are destructive in a dating relationship and can have tragic consequences if the relationship progresses to marriage. God's plan protects us from this devastating effects and those that are confused. Sex does not constitute love. As Christians, we are to develop agape love, the kind of God has for us, and give without exception in getting or something in return. The 1 Corinthians 13 model of love does not describe emotional feelings, but rather act of the will. Love is primarily an act of the will, but has tremendous emotional overtones because it has to do with how we relate to people. Our actions of love are tied to our emotions because relationships naturally have emotional bonds. Likewise, sex has a powerful emotional effect because God meant for it to be a joining of souls and the mind as well as physical union. That involves the moral conscience, which can inflict pain after physical pleasure is gone, unless the two have become one in marriage. Marital sex is a model of God's provisions to draw us closer to one another and to Him. The hardship of breaking off a relationship is another consequence. The pain that comes when one breaks up with a sexual partner is often an emotional, terrible tearing apart. Even when a couple realizes that fornication is sinful, they may try to find a way to justify the relationship because of the emotional bond formed between them. Sex forms a bond that exists when the rest of the relationship is bad. We see evidence of that when a girl stays with a partner who physically abuses her and who often treats her like dirt. Then there is the effects of psychological and emotional stress that comes. Premarital sex has a serious adverse effect on self-image of the partners. Rather than joy, an emotional crippling guilt seems to be the companion of promiscuous sex. Sex is such a definite experience that a part of each of us remains forever a part of the other. Humiliation and a poor self-image comes to many after sleeping with a person who will never call back or breaks off the relationship. Let marriage be held in honor, and let the bed be undefiled. That's in Hebrews 13:14. One partner accepts sex as love and directs his or her love towards the other. But anger and rejection comes when love is not returned. Resentment and bitterness often comes toward the other person, as well as blaming that one for causing you to violate your standards. We have shared our very bodies and souls with another, and when we don't find meaning in the relationship, we feel that we have been stripped of our dignity and self-worth. One reason that God gives His loving commands is so our dignity will be preserved. That dignity is the sense of nobility, worthiness, and honor God puts in everyone. That is a concept unique to human beings and makes us more than animals. The Bible spells out in numerous passages the inherent dignity and value in each person. That dignity and value comes because we are handmade by God in His image. God's spiritual and moral image, that's found in Genesis 1:27. If young people can understand that and realize that they are valuable to their parents and to God, it can help them in overcoming false assumptions of evolution, that we were mere animals and therefore must behave and act like animals. Some try to justify sexual experience before marriage as profitable to see if the two are compatible. But studies show a greater evidence of divorce among couples who are sexually active before marriage. Often these first experiences are not pleasurable and leave greater emotional scars that must be dealt with in marriage. Emotional damage almost always comes as a result of fornication and adultery. There has been a great increase in teenage suicides in recent years as sexual promiscuity has increased. Among with these increased pregnancies, abortion, and STDs. Certainly, this unrestrained lifestyle is one factor in the high suicide rate. Unequal levels of commitment is an effect that is nearly always present in premarital sex and can bring emotional devastation, especially for girls and women. The sex act has psychological binding effects. Sex increases the feeling of closeness to the partner. When this is not shared, one partner is always vulnerable to rejection. What if I don't please him anymore? She asks. If the boy is not as committed, the girl may feel she is merely being used by the guy to fulfill his physical lust. God's design for marriage brings protection against emotional suffering and builds self-esteem as we realize we are unique creatures made in the image of our Creator. The sexual bonding as He created it in marriage is for our good. A young person who uses self-control to say no to sex outside of marriage is building discipline and security into future relationships, because waiting gives your mind and body a time to mature. If we do not learn to develop self-control before marriage, it makes us easier for a lack of self-control to lead to extramarital affairs after marriage. Various studies have confirmed this fact. Consider the sad case of a 31-year-old woman whose life was filled with guilt. She began having sex at 19. She had admitted to having sex with 5 different men. She has never been married, but would like very much to be married. When she's asked why she began having sex so early, she said that it created a bond, hoping that she would be able to hold on to her boyfriend. When asked, did it work? No, she admitted. Then why do you think it's going to work now? She didn't have an answer. When repeated this old age adage, why should the guy buy the cow when he gets the milk free? God teaches that our bodies is the dwelling place of God, described in 1 Corinthians 6 as a temple of the Holy Spirit. Sexual immorality disgraces God's temple. Relationship effects. There are relational reasons to wait for sex until marriage. For one thing, sex hinders communication. Sex is often the easy way out to those who have never learned to communicate intimately apart from the physical. Efforts to really get to know the person and their likes and dislikes are often hindered when sexual activity starts. Sex becomes the focus, and the other aspects of the relationship have no chance to develop. And a relationship based solely on sex is in trouble, for you can spend only so much time in bed. When we delay physical involvement until its proper time, we allow the relationship to grow and to mature. Friendships lay the foundation for love to blossom. By obeying God's plan to wait for sex, a couple can discover other ways to communicate that will do much in building a healthy relationship. There is the involuntary comparison of sex partners. This is very harmful to both partners as they deal with mental flashbacks of earlier sexual encounters. These can be frustrating, disturbing, and destructive to a couple who later desire to experience God's plan for true intimacy and love in their marriage. Minds are like computers, as in all information is stored there. Intimate sexual encounters, which involve senses of sight, sound, and touch, are not easily erased. Memories are called to mind by association, something from within us, a thought, a feeling, or action, or from without us, through our five senses, reminds us of something similar from our past. If these early experiences involves hurt, pain, mistrust, exploitation, or guilt, then permanent scars are left, which carry over into marriage. The most important sex organ God gave us is our mind. When two people learn about sex together for the first time within marriage, they are creating vivid and unforgettable memories. These are positive memories that bind two people together in a loving, trusting union without any interference from the past. There are damaged family relationships as a result of sex before marriage. Often premarital sex is justified because we are getting married anyway. But studies have shown that there are twice as many broken engagements among those couples and those that are ones more than likely to divorce or separate or engage in adultery. One of the things God protects is the trust and assurance of fidelity that is in a proper sexual union brings. The children who come as a result of fornication and adultery, safe sex is very often not safe as preventative of pregnancy. Then a child is born without the proper foundation for nurturing that should have been there. The exploiting violence among teens have a direct relationship to children born out of wedlock and that is raised by a single parent. What God intended as a blessing of man and woman's love brings shame, embarrassment, and trouble. Damaged relationships with parents also comes as a result of unlawful sexual behavior. And when they experience this, the loving parents can forgive, and they must do that. But they will also experience hurt and pain for years until they have forgiven. Last, there's often disappointment and regret at losing your virginity. When we lose something we know is valuable, we feel regret. I do not know how many young people there is that had wished that they could have not done what they done. God says that He will protect us from that, so He reserves sex for marriage. There is no chance of heartache later when our first sexual experience is with the person we will spend our lives with. When we wait until the wedding night, we have the most special gift that has been reserved for our chosen lifelong companion. We establish a bond of trust and love that has no equal. God's design to limit sex to marriage protects us from hurting each other and provides the proper setting in which to express love through sex. The story is told of a 15-year-old boy who looked and looked for a special gift to give his true love of life. He finally settled on a beautiful ring, and he gave it to her as a token of his love. And as usually happens at that age, in a few months there was another true love. And again he looked and looked, but could find nothing more beautiful than the same ring he had given before. As you might suspect, the same thing happened a few more times during his teen years. And then at 22, he did find his genuine true love. He looked and looked and looked to find another special gift for her on their wedding day, but all he could find was the same ring, which by that time had lost its special significance. I think you get the point. There is no gift as special and as sacred as the giving of one's body. And if you could wait and give it during marriage, you'll find that there's all kinds of blessings that will be brought to you. Now, I think I've made the point that you need to wait to have sex before marriage. I've not mentioned what it would be like to be a Christian, but I wish you would be one. You need to hear the Word, and you've heard that Word several times on this program and many others like it. You need to believe that Word. You need to confess Christ as the Son of God. You need to repent of your sins, and you need to be baptized for the remission of those sins. Then once you're baptized, you need to live your life in a way that's pleasing to God, and you've been promised the crown of life. If you've done that in time past and you've fallen back, He has promised to forgive you if you will ask for that forgiveness. If you need any assistance, please contact us, and we'd be glad to help you. Thank you.